What if the monster you fear most is not lurking in the shadows of the forest, but hidden deep inside yourself? Under the cold silver light of the full moon, legends say something stirs. A howl cuts through the night, echoing across ancient forests. For centuries, people believed that this sound was not just the call of a wolf, it was a warning. A signal that a man, once ordinary, had transformed into a beast. The werewolf. This chilling figure has haunted human imagination for thousands of years. Every culture, in every corner of the world, seems to hold a story of humans becoming animals, losing themselves to primal instincts. But the werewolf, the manwolf, is different. It embodies a fear far greater than wild animals. It reflects the terror of what happens when humanity itself breaks down, when the line between man and beast vanishes under the light of the moon. Picture yourself in a small medieval village. The nights are long, the forests are endless, and danger lurks everywhere. You hear rumors of livestock slaughtered, children missing, blood found near the edge of the woods. No one dares to step outside once darkness falls, because they believe a monster is among them, someone they know, a neighbor, a friend, maybe even family, who by day appears human, but by night transforms into a creature with fangs and claws. What makes the werewolf so terrifying is not just its savagery, but its closeness to us. Unlike vampires who come from distant castles or demons from another realm, the werewolf comes from within. It is the beast we might all carry inside. That is why the myth is so powerful and so enduring. And here's the mystery. These stories of man-beasts are not limited to one time or place. From the myths of ancient Greece to Viking warriors in the north, to Native American legends of skinwalkers, the theme repeats. Humans transforming into wolves, coyotes, or other predators. How is it possible that cultures separated by oceans and centuries all describe the same nightmare? Is it just coincidence? A universal human fear? Or could there be something hidden in our ancient past that gave birth to the legend of the werewolf? One thing is certain: when the full moon rises, the old stories come alive again. And the question still lingers: what if they were true? Throughout history, every civilization has feared the wild. The night, the forest, and the creatures that lurk within have always been symbols of danger. But more frightening than any predator was the idea that a human being, one of us, would cross the boundary and become something else, something untamed, something that could no longer be trusted. Think about it. In Europe, villagers whispered about wolves prowling under the full moon. In Africa, stories told of shamans and warriors who could wear the skin of lions or leopards, gaining the power of the beast. Across the ocean in the Americas, native tribes warned of skinwalkers, dark sorcerers who could transform into coyotes or wolves, stalking the night in borrowed shapes. In Asia, legends spoke of humans shifting into tigers or jackals, driven by bloodlust or curses. Different places, different animals, but the same haunting pattern: the fear of losing humanity and becoming a predator. It was never just about the animal itself, it was about the transformation, the collapse of the line between man and beast, and why wolves, above all. For ancient people, wolves were not just predators. They were intelligent, organized, relentless hunters. Wolves represented the very edge of human survival, forcing our ancestors to live in constant vigilance. To imagine that a neighbor, a friend, even a family member could become such a predator, that was terror on a level beyond the ordinary. These fears shaped rituals, stories, and warnings passed down through generations. Parents told children not to wander into the woods at night, not only because of wild animals, but because of the monsters that looked human by day and hunted like wolves by night. Perhaps these legends were a way of explaining real horrors: unexplained killings, violent criminals, or even diseases that changed a person's behavior. But on another level, the werewolf story spoke to something deeper inside the human psyche. The realization that beneath civilization, beneath laws and order, there is still an animal instinct waiting to break free. It is no wonder, then, that, across the globe, from the icy tundras of the north to the deserts of Africa, the same question haunted human imagination. What happens if we lose control? What happens if the beast inside takes over? Because in every culture, the werewolf, or its equivalent, was more than just a monster. It was a mirror, showing us the part of ourselves we fear the most. If there is one image that defines the werewolf, it is the full moon. For centuries, people believed that the moon's silver light was not just a symbol of mystery, but a force of transformation. When the night sky glowed bright and round, that was the moment when the curse awakened. Ordinary men, unable to resist, would feel their bones twisting, their skin tearing, their minds consumed by an ancient hunger. The moon was not just a backdrop, was the trigger. But why the moon? In many ancient cultures, the moon was tied to cycles of life and death, fertility and madness. Its shifting phases seemed to hold power over tides, crops, and even human emotions. The word lunacy itself comes from luna, meaning moon. It is no wonder that people once believed it could drive humans into madness or into monstrous forms. Then, there is blood. Always blood. In nearly every tale, the werewolf craves it, hunts it, and is drawn to it like a moth to flame. Blood is more than just a substance, it is life itself. To drink it, to spill it, was to cross a line no human should ever cross. For villagers telling these stories, blood was the proof of the beast. A torn animal in the barnyard, a body found with claw marks and missing flesh. These were not just tragedies, they were signs. Signs that a wolfman walked among them. And of course, the transformation itself. Perhaps the most horrifying detail in all werewolf legends is not the killing, but the becoming. The grotesque shift from man to beast. Imagine the cracking of bones as the body reshapes itself. The tearing of skin as fur bursts through. The scream of a human voice melting into a howl. The horror is not just in what the creature does, it's in watching someone you know disappear, replaced by something unrecognizable. These motifs, moonlight, blood, and transformation, are what make the werewolf more than just a predator. They turn it into a symbol of fear, mystery, and forbidden power. And because they repeat across cultures and centuries, they point to something timeless, something deep within us all. So when people spoke of werewolves, they were not simply telling ghost stories. They were touching on themes as old as humanity itself. The power of nature, the fragility of civilization, and the terrifying possibility that we, too, might not be fully in control of what we are. Legends of the werewolf are more than just frightening bedtime stories. They are windows into the human mind, into the fears, hopes, and mysteries that have haunted us since the dawn of civilization. When we put together the pieces, the terrifying howl under the full moon, the hunger for blood, the monstrous transformation, we see a pattern. And patterns, in mythology, often point towards something deeper. For villagers in medieval Europe, a werewolf was not a fantasy. It was a danger they believed could be hiding in their own community. For warriors in the north, becoming one with the wolf was not a curse, but a source of power, a way to channel nature's savagery. For ancient Greeks, the werewolf was punishment from the gods, a moral lesson carved into myth. And for tribes across the world, the idea of humans shifting into beasts reflected something primal and understanding. That the boundary between man and nature was never absolute. But this raises a chilling question. Why does the same story repeat across continents and centuries? How could cultures separated by oceans, with no contact, all describe humans merging with wolves, lions, coyotes, or other predators? Perhaps these stories were simply metaphors, cautionary tales about violence, greed, and the animal instincts we struggle to control. Perhaps they were ways of explaining crimes or tragedies before science could. But there is another possibility, one that cannot be dismissed so easily, that these legends might contain echoes of real events, real people, or real phenomena that our ancestors encountered long ago. Could it be that in ancient times, there were individuals or tribes who lived like beasts, wild, savage, predatory, so much so that their memory became myth? Or did people truly believe they witnessed transformations, experiences so terrifying they carved them into culture and folklore? And if so, what exactly were they seeing? These are the questions that make the werewolf story so enduring. It is not just about monsters, it is about us. It forces us to wonder whether humanity itself is stable, or whether something darker lies beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And so, as we journey deeper into history, from the myths of ancient Greece to the rituals of Viking warriors, to the trials of the Middle Ages, we will follow the footprints of the werewolf across time. Because only by tracing its origins can we hope to answer the oldest question of all. Were werewolves ever real? Or are they only the shadows of our own fears? To understand the ancient roots of the werewolf, we must first travel back to Greece, a land where myths and reality blurred together, where gods walked among mortals, and where every natural force was explained through divine will. In this world, nothing was impossible. Men could become beasts, women could transform into trees, and punishment from the gods could twist both body and soul. It is here, in this fertile ground of myth and legend, that the earliest and most influential story of the werewolf was born. The Greeks believed their gods ruled not only the heavens, but also the morality of humankind. To honor or to offend the gods was never a trivial act. Every feast, every sacrifice, every ritual was tied to divine judgment. And to cross the gods, to mock them or defy their will, was to invite a fate far worse than death. Among the many myths recorded, one stands out as the first true tale of lycanthropy, the word we now use to describe the transformation of man into wolf. This story belongs to a king named Lycaon, a ruler of Arcadia, a land said to be wild, mountainous, and deeply connected to wolves. Even the very name Lycaon shares its root with Lycos, the Greek word for wolf. Imagine the scene: a mighty king, confident and proud, presiding over his people. But arrogance and cruelty lived within him. In an age where rulers claimed divine favor, Lycaon dared to test Zeus himself, the king of gods, in a way so vile that it would shock the world. For centuries, his actions would not only seal his own fate, but also give rise to one of the most haunting legends of transformation ever told. Before we reach that moment of punishment, though, we must pause and understand the deeper meaning. For the Greeks, myths were not mere entertainment. They were moral lessons, warnings about hubris, greed, and betrayal. Every transformation in myth carried a message, a reflection of the dangers within human nature. To be turned into a beast was more than just a curse, was the ultimate symbol of losing one's humanity. And so, in this ancient land, under the gaze of jealous gods and fearful mortals, the stage was set for the first man to become a wolf. A punishment so terrifying it would echo through history and shape the werewolf myth for millennia to come. The legend tells us that King Lycaon of Arcadia was no ordinary ruler. Proud, cunning, and ambitious, he considered himself equal to the gods. In a world where mortals were expected to worship and obey, this arrogance alone was dangerous. But Lycaon went far beyond pride. He committed an act so vile that even the ancient storytellers wrote of it with horror. It begins with a visit from Zeus, the mighty god of thunder. Curious about the corruption of humankind, descended from Olympus. Disguised as a wandering traveler, he wished to test the king's hospitality to see whether mortals would honor the sacred tradition of welcoming guests or betray it. When Lycaon saw this mysterious visitor, he suspected the man might be a god in disguise. Instead of showing respect, he devised a cruel test of his own. Lycaon prepared a banquet. But on the table, he placed not lamb, not goat, not deer, but the flesh of a human. Some versions of the story say it was a prisoner. Others whisper a darker tale that it was his own son. Slaughtered and cooked to deceive Zeus. His goal was to mock the gods, to prove that if Zeus was truly divine, he would recognize the abomination placed before him. Imagine the scene, the hall lit by firelight. The king smiling with arrogance, the disguised god seated at the feast. The smell of roasted meat fills the air, but beneath it lies something foul, something unnatural. This was no ordinary test, it was blasphemy of the highest order. Zeus, of course, knew the truth immediately. No deception could fool the king of the gods. But he did not reveal his anger at once. Instead, the stories tell us he stood, casting off his disguise, and in a flash of thunder and lightning, he revealed his true form. The mortals in the hall trembled, their banquet destroyed by divine fury. In that moment, Lycaon's crime was laid bare. He had mocked the sacred laws of hospitality, desecrated the bond between man and God, and committed an act of cannibalism. For the Greeks, no sin could be greater, and so Zeus prepared a punishment. One that would strip Lycaon of his humanity, one that would turn his very nature against him. Curse that would transform him into the first wolfman in recorded history. The hall of King Lycaon shook with thunder. The flames of the torches flickered wildly, as if they too feared the storm that raged inside Zeus's wrath. The mortal king, once so arrogant, now stood paralyzed. He had challenged the gods, desecrated the sacred laws of hospitality, and even defiled the most primal taboo, offering human flesh at the table of Olympus's ruler. For this, there could be no forgiveness. Zeus raised his hand, and the air itself seemed to crack. The ancient storytellers tell us that lightning struck the feast, reducing the table to ash and scattering the false banquet in a blaze of fire. The cries of the guests echoed through the great hall as the king himself fell to his knees. But his punishment was not death. It was far more terrible. Before the eyes of his people, Lycaon began to change. His proud human features twisted and warped. His skin rippled as thick fur burst forth, black as the night. His hands, once adorned with the rings of a king, stretched into claws sharp enough to tear flesh from bone. His mouth elongated into a snarling muzzle dripping with saliva as his teeth grew into fangs. His eyes, which once gleamed with ambition, now glowed with the wildfire of a predator. The screams of those who watched quickly turned to silence. For what they saw was not their king anymore, was something half man, half beast. Something cursed. Something that would forever hunger for blood. Zeus declared his sentence with a voice. Like rolling thunder, you wished to mock the gods. You wished to test me with flesh unfit for man or god. Then flesh shall be your prison, and hunger shall be your eternal companion. From this night forward, you shall walk the earth as a wolf, forever stripped of your throne, your honor, and your humanity. With that, the transformation was complete. Lycaon howled, a chilling primal sound that echoed through the Arcadian mountains. No longer a king, no longer a man, he fled into the forests, cursed to live as the first of his kind, a creature neither fully human nor fully animal. And thus the legend of the werewolf was born. A story not of simple superstition, but of divine punishment. A tale that carried with it a warning that to defy the gods was to lose one's very humanity. Yet, this was only the beginning. For Lycaon's curse would not end with him alone. Would ripple through time, spreading fear across generations. Lycaon's howl did not die in the mountains of Arcadia. It carried on the wind, echoing into the hearts of his people, who whispered in terror of the king who had become a beast. Some claimed they still saw him prowling the forests at night, eyes glowing like embers, hunting livestock and even humans. The villagers dared not enter the woods after dark, for to hear his cry was said to be an omen of death. But the curse of Lycaon did not belong to him alone. Ancient Greek storytellers believed that his punishment set in motion a dark possibility for mankind, that the boundary between human and beast was far thinner than anyone wished to admit. They feared that certain sins, acts of bloodshed, betrayal, or sacrilege could awaken the same transformation in others. Indeed, old Greek rituals hinted at this dread. In Arcadia, at a mysterious festival called the Lycaea, some believed that men could be turned into wolves if they consumed the flesh of a sacrificial animal, or, worse, if human flesh was secretly mixed into the offering. According to one version of the tale, a participant who committed this taboo would be cursed to roam as a wolf for 9 years. And only if he abstained from human meat during that time could he hope to become a man again. If not, the beast within would consume him forever. To the Greeks, Lycaon's fate was more than just a cautionary story. It was a mirror reflecting their fears about human nature itself. They asked, what separates us from animals? Civilization. Law, respect for the divine, these were fragile shields. Strip them away, and perhaps any man could descend into savagery. His humanity lost to the hunger of the wolf, and so the myth of Lycaon endured. It was passed down by poets, repeated in hushed tones around fires, and etched into the cultural memory of Greece. From Arcadia, the tale would ripple outward, carried by travelers, merchants, and storytellers, until it took on a life of its own. Lycaon had become more than a king, more than a wolf. He had become a symbol, a warning that beneath the skin of every man lies the potential for monstrous transformation. A curse that, once spoken into existence, would travel far beyond Greece, shaping legends in Rome, in Europe, and eventually across the world. The howl of Lycaon was only the beginning. What if the story of the werewolf had not ended in Greece? What if it found new soil in the heart of Rome, a civilization built on power, conquest, and myth? The Romans, heirs to Greek culture, did not merely preserve the legend of men turning into beasts, they reimagined it, binding it to their own identity and fears. At the very center of Roman origin lies the wolf. According to legend, the twin founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, were abandoned as infants and left to die by the Tiber River. Yet instead of perishing, they were discovered by a she-wolf, who nursed them, protected them, and gave them the strength to survive. From this story, the wolf became a sacred emblem of Rome itself, fierce, protective, untamed, and powerful. But while the wolf was revered, it also cast a long shadow. The Romans inherited Greek tales like that of Lycaon and folded them into their own worldview. They saw the wolf not just as a guardian, but as a reminder of what lay beneath the surface of civilization, the primal, animal side of humanity that could erupt at any time. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder recorded strange accounts of men cursed to roam the wilderness as wolves. He described a tribe in Arcadia where men supposedly transformed after performing sacred rituals, echoing the Lycaea of Greece. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, retold the tale of Lycaon himself, ensuring that the myth lived on in Roman literature. Yet to Roman audiences, the story carried new meaning. To them, the werewolf embodied the tension between Rome's ordered society and the chaos that always threatened to break it apart. Wolves prowled the forests that surrounded Roman roads and outposts, and they were both feared and admired by soldiers and peasants alike. The idea that a man might become one was not a distant fantasy, but a chilling possibility. Superstition whispered that those who committed dark deeds, or those cursed by the gods, could walk in human form by day and stalk their prey as wolves by night. And so, within Rome, the wolf was both a symbol of empire and a warning of humanity's darker instincts. It was worshipped in temples, carved into monuments, yet feared in tales told by firelight. In the Roman imagination, the werewolf was not merely a monster, it was a reflection of the empire itself, powerful, relentless, and always balancing on the knife's edge between civilization and savagery. Imagine standing in the heart of ancient Rome, where the streets echo not only with the clamor of soldiers and merchants, but with the chants of priests dressed in animal skins. Every year, in the shadow of the Palatine Hill, a strange and primal ritual took place, the festival of Lupercalia. This was no ordinary celebration, dedicated to fertility, purification, and the wolf goddess Lupa, who nursed Romulus and Remus. The festival carried undertones of both reverence and fear. Priests of the cult known as the Luperci would gather in a sacred cave believed to be the very spot where the she-wolf had suckled the twins. Here, they sacrificed goats and dogs, animals linked with both fertility and the wild. After the sacrifice, the priests would cut strips of goat hide, soak them in blood, and run half-naked through the streets of Rome, striking bystanders with the bloody thongs. Far from being seen as grotesque, this act was welcomed. Women, in particular, sought to be touched by the Luperci, believing it would bless them with fertility and safe childbirth. But beneath the surface of this ritual lay something more primal. The Luperci, draped in animal skins and drenched in blood, blurred the line between man and beast. Their wild race through the streets recalled the untamed energy of wolves themselves, creatures both feared and revered. To onlookers, it was as though these men had temporarily shed their humanity and embraced their animal nature. Was this merely symbolic theater, or did Romans truly believe in transformation? Some whispers suggested the latter. Roman superstitions told of men cursed to become wolves if they offended the gods or violated sacred oaths. The Lupercalia, with its blood, frenzy, and invocation of the wolf spirit, seemed to brush dangerously close to those very myths. To devout Romans, it was a reminder that beneath the marble grandeur of their empire, ancient powers still lurked wild, unpredictable, and capable of turning men into monsters. Even later, as Christianity spread and sought to stamp out pagan practices, echoes of Lupercalia remained. The imagery of men donning skins, channeling beasts, and surrendering to the wolf spirit continued to haunt the imagination. For in those frenzied days of February, the boundary between man and wolf was not a myth, was ritual, performed before the eyes of an empire. The Roman world was not only an empire of soldiers and marble, but also of stories, some carved into history, others whispered in fear. Among their many writings, a handful stand out as the first true accounts of men turning into wolves. The natural historian Pliny the Elder, in his monumental work Naturalis Historia, recorded tales of a people known as the Arcadians. According to rumor, during a sacred ritual, one chosen man was led to a marsh, where he removed his clothes and hung them upon a tree. Crossing the water, he was said to transform into a wolf, cursed to roam the wilderness for 9 years. He refrained from eating human flesh during this time. He could return to his village, reclaim his clothes, and regain his human form. But if he gave in to hunger and tasted human blood, the curse would bind him forever. Roman poets also drew upon this unsettling theme. In his Metamorphoses, Ovid told the tale of King Lycaon, who dared to test the god Jupiter by serving him human flesh at a banquet. In punishment, the god transformed him into a wolf, his savage appetite now reflected in his monstrous body. This myth not only explained the origin of werewolves, but also gave us the very word, lycanthropy, born from the name Lycaon himself. Another chilling reference comes from Petronius, the Roman satirist. In his Satyricon, he describes a soldier who, under the moonlight, stripped off his clothes and transformed into a wolf before the eyes of his companion. The tale is recounted with both humor and horror. As the beast ran off into the night to feed on livestock, leaving behind only dread and disbelief to Romans, these stories were not mere entertainment. They carried warnings about hubris, blasphemy, and the thin line separating man from beast. They reflected the same anxieties felt during rituals like the Lupercalia, that man, pushed beyond the bounds of civilization, might fall back into the savagery of the wild. And so, from historians, poets, and satirists alike, the specter of the werewolf entered Western thought. It was not just a creature of superstition, but a cultural symbol, a reminder that even in the heart of the empire, the wilderness, with all its primal terror, was never truly banished. As the Roman Empire expanded, its armies did not only carry weapons and banners, they carried stories. Wherever Roman legions marched, they brought with them the myths of Lycaon, the cautionary warnings of Pliny, and the dark humor of Petronius. And as these tales mingled with the folklore of distant lands, the werewolf transformed from a local superstition into a continental legend. In Gaul and Germania, soldiers stationed along the frontier shared tales of men cursed to wander as wolves. These stories blended seamlessly with the existing tribal lore of shapeshifters and wolf spirits. To the Germanic tribes, the wolf was already a creature of power, both feared and revered. The Roman accounts of lycanthropy only deepened the mystique, giving the wolf a new role as a cursed form of man rather than a divine or heroic animal. In Britannia, Roman occupation left more than roads and fortresses. It also left echoes of Mediterranean myth. Local Celtic traditions spoke of warriors who could take on the strength of beasts, and Roman werewolf legends merged with these beliefs. In time, whispers of cursed transformations and nocturnal predators took root in the island's folklore, where they would later evolve into chilling medieval tales. Even in the eastern provinces, Roman writings traveled along trade routes carried by merchants, scholars, and priests. The myth of the wolfman was reshaped by each culture it touched, sometimes as a warning against cannibalism, other times as a punishment for defying the gods. The spread of these legends was not accidental. Rome's cultural dominance meant that its literature, festivals, and religious practices seeped into the daily life of conquered peoples. The Metamorphoses of Ovid, copied and studied for centuries, ensured that the tale of Lycaon remained alive long after Rome itself had fallen. In monasteries of the early Middle Ages, these ancient texts were preserved, waiting to be rediscovered and retold. Thus, the Roman Empire became the great bridge that carried the werewolf myth across time and geography. What began as scattered whispers in Greece, Arcadia, and Rome would, through conquest and culture, become a pan-European obsession. By the time the empire crumbled, the image of the man-wolf was no longer confined to ritual or satire, had become a symbol of primal fear, one destined to stalk the imagination of Europe for centuries to come. The fall of Rome did not silence the werewolf. Instead, as Europe descended into the shadows of the Middle Ages, the myth evolved. What had once been a tale of divine punishment or strange transformation now became entangled with religion, morality, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. Christianity was spreading rapidly across Europe, reshaping the way people understood the world. The wolf-long, a creature of both reverence and fear, was reimagined through the lens of Christian belief. No longer simply a predator of the forest, it became a symbol of the devil himself, lurking to devour the innocent flock of Christ. 2. Transform into a wolf was no longer a quirk of the gods or a trick of nature. It was a mark of sin, witchcraft, or even a pact with Satan. In the villages and towns of medieval Europe, life was already harsh. Famine, disease, and war haunted daily existence. At night, the forests surrounding small settlements seemed endless and terrifying, filled with unseen predators. Against this backdrop, the myth of the werewolf took on a darker, more sinister role. It was not just a story, it was a warning. Anyone who acted strangely, who lived on the fringes of society, or who violated Christian norms could be accused of harboring a wolf within. The church played a powerful role in this transformation. Priests and theologians warned their congregations that the devil prowled in many forms, and that those who strayed from God's path could be cursed with monstrous fates. Manuscripts of the time began to depict werewolves as agents of evil, their cursed bodies reflecting the corruption of their souls. The werewolf legend also became tied to the growing fear of witchcraft. Just as witches were accused of flying through the night or casting harmful spells, so too were Menand, sometimes women accused of donning a wolf's skin to hunt their neighbors. Trials and confessions often extracted under torture, painted lurid pictures of men who transformed under the full moon to serve demonic masters. Thus, the medieval imagination, the werewolf was no longer a curious relic of ancient mythology. It was a living threat, a symbol of sin and damnation, stalking not only the forests of Europe but also the hearts of its people. And as the centuries passed, this fear would only grow stronger, fueling trials, executions, and some of the darkest chapters in the history of superstition. By the late Middle Ages, the werewolf was no longer just a tale whispered by the fire, became a crime. Across Europe, men and women were accused of transforming into wolves and committing acts of murder, cannibalism, and witchcraft. These accusations, often fueled by hysteria, fear, and suspicion, led to some of the most chilling trials in history. In France, Germany, and parts of Eastern Europe, villagers would whisper of mysterious attacks in the woods, livestock slaughtered, children missing, or bodies found mutilated. When no natural explanation could be found, the blame often fell on a supposed loup-garou, the French word for werewolf. Courts, heavily influenced by the church, began prosecuting people under charges of lycanthropy. Confessions almost always extracted through brutal torture described horrific scenes of men wearing wolfskins, devouring human flesh, or making pacts with the devil. One infamous case took place in 1521 in Poligny, France. Two men, Pierre Berget and Michel Verdun, were accused of transforming into wolves and attacking travelers. Under torture, they confessed to serving Satan and claimed to have rubbed a magical ointment on their skin to assume a wolf's form. Both were executed, burned alive as a warning to others. Another haunting case emerged in Germany with Peter Stump, often called the Werewolf of Bedburg. In 1589, Stump was accused of countless murders and acts of cannibalism. During his trial, he claimed to have received a magical belt from the devil that allowed him to change shape at will. His punishment was brutal. He was tortured with red-hot pincers, decapitated, and his body burned. To the terrified villagers, his execution was not only justice, but also protection against the supernatural. These trials were not rare. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, Europe witnessed a wave of werewolf hunts that paralleled the infamous witch trials. Fear spread like wildfire. Anyone who lived as an outcast, suffered from strange illnesses, or behaved unusually could be branded a werewolf. In truth, many historians believe these cases were less about monsters and more about fear of the unknown, fear of the devil, and fear of the wilderness that pressed in on every village. But for the people of the time, the werewolf was very real, and the punishment for such a curse was death. During the Middle Ages, the shadow of witchcraft loomed large over Europe. The church believed that witches were servants of the devil, capable of summoning storms, cursing crops, and spreading disease. But among the many dark powers attributed to them, none was as terrifying as the ability to create or become a werewolf. In folklore, witches and werewolves were often inseparable. It was said that a witch could curse a man, binding his soul to the body of a wolf, forcing him to wander the night as a bloodthirsty beast. Others believed that witches themselves had the power to shapeshift, taking on the form of wolves to hunt their victims in the forest. The line between sorcery and lycanthropy blurred until they became almost the same crime. Records from inquisitorial trials revealed chilling confessions. Some accused werewolves claimed they had received a salve or potion from witches, which, when rubbed onto the skin, allowed them to assume the form of a wolf. In parts of Eastern Europe, belief spread that witches held midnight gatherings deep in the woods where they danced with wolves, drank blood, and swore allegiance to Satan. To the terrified villagers, these stories explained the unexplainable. Missing livestock, the sudden disappearances, the howls in the night. One legend tells of witches who would keep wolves as familiars, feeding them human flesh from graveyards. Others spoke of covens where witches and werewolves worked together as hunters, striking fear into entire regions. In the witch trials of Livonia, modern-day Latvia, and Estonia, those accused described secret armies of werewolves who fought under the command of witches. They were said to prowl the countryside, leaving behind only blood and ashes. For the church, the connection between werewolves and witches was undeniable. Both represented rebellion against God. Both served the devil, and both threatened the fragile order of Christian society. By linking lycanthropy with witchcraft, authorities justified harsher punishments, ensuring that anyone suspected of either crime was swiftly executed. Looking back, it is easy to see how fear shaped these beliefs. Wolves were the embodiment of wilderness and danger, which is the symbol of forbidden knowledge and rebellion. Together, they became the perfect scapegoat for everything society could not control. In the medieval imagination, the werewolf was not just a beast of the night, it was the devil's hound unleashed by the hands of witches. As the Middle Ages gave way to the dawn of the Renaissance, the grip of superstition slowly began to loosen. Europe was changing. Cities grew, trade flourished, and the rediscovery of classical knowledge sparked a new hunger for reason and science. Yet for centuries, the fear of werewolves had haunted villages and countrysides. How then did this terror finally begin to fade? Part of the answer lies in the rise of medicine and natural philosophy. Physicians began studying the human body and mind in ways that would have been unthinkable in earlier centuries. Disorders such as epilepsy, rabies, or severe psychosis, once believed to be the mark of the beast within, were now explained through the language of illness rather than possession. Scholars argued that those accused of being werewolves might simply be suffering from what we today call mental health conditions. The monstrous was slowly reframed as the medical dot. At the same time, Europe was weary of the witch trials and executions that had scarred generations. By the 17th century, skepticism grew among intellectuals and even within the church itself. Judges began to question the reliability of confessions extracted under torture. Lawyers and scholars pointed out the lack of evidence in many supposed cases of lycanthropy. And as rational thought gained ground, the notion of men turning into wolves seemed less like divine punishment and more like folklore, born of fear. Still, the decline was not sudden. In rural villages, old beliefs lingered. Farmers continued to whisper about wolves that walked upright or howls that carried the voices of the damned. But in courts and universities, the werewolf was losing its power. The terror that had once justified executions was now being relegated to the realm of legend by the late Enlightenment. The figure of the werewolf was no longer seen as a real threat to Christian society. Instead, it became part of the cultural imagination, something told in stories, recorded in local chronicles, or shared around fires on long winter nights. The beast that had once prowled the legal and religious systems of Europe was now caged. In the realm of myth, this transition marked a turning point. The werewolf did not disappear, but it changed. No longer the devil's hound unleashed by witches. It began to evolve into a creature of folklore and, eventually, of literature. The stage was set for the werewolf's rebirth not in the courts of the Inquisition, but in the pages of stories that would echo into modern times. With the fires of the witch trials fading into history, the werewolf began to take on a new form. No longer a subject of court records and inquisitors. it returned to where it had first begun in the whispered tales of the people. Across Europe, from the dark forests of Germany to the snowbound villages of Scandinavia, the werewolf transformed into a figure of folklore, a creature caught between superstition and storytelling. In rural communities, wolves still haunted the imagination. They were predators that threatened livestock, lingered on the edges of fields, and howled from the forests at night. But the werewolf was something more. It was not only the fear of the animal, but the fear of betrayal that someone within the village, a familiar face, could secretly harbor the beast within. Around firesides, families told tales of neighbors who vanished under the full moon, of hunters who returned with strange wounds, of travelers who swore they saw a man's eyes glowing in a wolf's skull. Unlike the rigid accusations of the medieval courts, folklore allowed the werewolf myth to shift and adapt. In some regions, the werewolf was cursed, doomed to roam until freed by a prayer or an act of mercy. In others, it was a punishment from God for sins committed, such as cannibalism, murder, or breaking sacred laws. And in yet other places, the werewolf was even seen as a protector and unwilling guardian who defended villages from true wolves or evil spirits. This flexibility gave the legend resilience. The werewolf became a canvas for moral lessons, warnings, and cultural fears. Parents told their children that those who strayed too far from home at night might fall prey to the wolfman. Lovers whispered about men who turned into beasts under the moon's silver gaze. Travelers carried charms of silver, or recited prayers to ward off encounters on lonely roads. But perhaps most importantly, a werewolf began to step into the realm of literature. Local ballads, chapbooks, and written accounts preserved these oral traditions, giving them permanence. What had once been whispered in the dark could now be read aloud, shared, and retold beyond the village that birthed it. The transformation was complete. From legal terror to cultural myth, the werewolf was no longer a threat that sent men to the stake. It was a story, alive in the imagination of Europe. And as these stories spread, the werewolf legend prepared to take on new shapes. In the centuries to come, if the werewolf was reborn in folklore, then Europe became its great canvas. Each region shaped the legend in its own image, weaving the creature into local fears, traditions, and landscapes. In Germany, the forests were vast, dense, and filled with real wolves that terrorized villages. Here, tales spoke of the werewolf, a man cursed by dark magic or punished by God. Unlike the savage, uncontrollable beast of later centuries, German werewolves were often tragic figures, condemned to wander in half-human, half-law form until someone showed them compassion. In some villages, people believed that giving bread to a werewolf could release them from their curse. France, however, painted a darker picture, known as the loup-garou. The werewolf was often associated with witchcraft and pacts with the devil. Stories from the French countryside told of men and women who anointed themselves with magical ointments or wore enchanted belts that allowed them to transform under the moonlight. In Brittany, parents warned children not to misbehave, for the loup-garou would snatch them away at night. These French legends often blurred the line between sorcery and lycanthropy, echoing the fears of the witch trials that had scarred the land. Further north, in Scandinavia, the werewolf took on a unique role. Norse sagas told of warriors who donned Úlfhéðnar skins that granted them the ferocity of beasts in battle. Unlike the cursed werewolves of France and Germany, these figures were not always villains, but sometimes celebrated as fearsome fighters blessed by the gods. Yet, alongside these heroic images, Scandinavian folklore also warned of cursed families where lycanthropy was inherited, passed from parent to child like a dark legacy. Across Eastern Europe, the werewolf blended with vampire lore. In Slavic traditions, those who died violently or without proper burial could rise again, sometimes as wolves rather than blood drinkers. These beliefs tied the werewolf not just to the living, but to the restless dead. deepening its connection to the supernatural. What unites these diverse traditions is how the werewolf became a reflection of each society's anxieties. In Germany, it was the weight of guilt and redemption. In France, the shadow of witchcraft. In Scandinavia, the thin line between man and warrior beast. In Eastern Europe, the dread of the grave. These regional differences ensured that the werewolf was never a single story, but many stories each, one shaped by the land, the people, and the fears they carried. And through these stories, the werewolf took root firmly in European culture, ready to step into the broader world of literature and art. When folklore passed from the spoken word into ink and parchment, the werewolf began to take on new life. No longer just whispers by the fireside. The beast became immortalized in poems, chronicles, and moral tales, shaping how future generations understood it. One of the earliest written accounts comes from the 12th century, in the work of the Norman poet Marie de France. Her Les Bisclaveret tells the story of a noble knight cursed to transform into a wolf whenever he removed his clothes. Unlike the savage killers of later myths, Bisclaveret is portrayed as loyal and honorably well trapped in a wolf's body. His tragedy stems not from evil, but from betrayal by his wife, who steals his clothes and leaves him trapped. This tale shows that medieval literature often treated the werewolf not just as a monster, but as a mirror of human struggles, loyalty, love, and betrayal. At the same time, clerical writers recorded cases of supposed werewolves in church documents. In Ireland, the Topographia Hibernica described men who could shift into wolves and roam the countryside, yet still retained human voices and manners. These accounts blurred the line between myth and reported fact, making the werewolf both a figure of legend and a creature of the real world at least in the eyes of medieval scholars. In Germanic and Slavic ballads, werewolves appeared as both villains and cursed souls. Poets described them as warnings against sin, while folk songs spoke of men doomed to roam forests under the moon. Here, literature reinforced the moral function of the werewolf, a living punishment for those who strayed from God's path. By the Renaissance, the werewolf had become a subject of fascination in popular tales. In French collections of folklore, the loup-garou appeared repeatedly, sometimes as a man punished for cruelty, other times as an innocent victim. Writers used the werewolf to explore questions of identity. Was the beast inside all men, waiting to break free? Or was it something inflicted from outside through curses and magic? What these early works reveal is that the werewolf was never just a creature of claws and fangs. It was a literary symbol, shifting with the needs of each storyteller. Sometimes it stood for betrayal, sometimes for divine punishment, and sometimes it reflected the pain of being misunderstood, caught between two worlds, human and beast. Through literature, the werewolf escaped the boundaries of local folklore and became a universal archetype, preparing the stage for its darker turn during the witch hunts and trials of early modern Europe. As Europe entered the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, the werewolf slipped from the pages of poetry into the cold reality of courtrooms. What had once been folklore became grounds for accusation, prosecution, and execution. In an age when the fear of witches, demons, and heresy burned across the continent, the werewolf became tangled in the hysteria of the witch hunts. In 16th and 17th century France and Germany, entire villages lived in terror of the loup-garou. Any unexplained death, a child lost in the woods, or mutilated livestock could trigger whispers of a werewolf. Soon, these whispers reached local courts. Peasants pointed fingers at neighbors, and judges steeped in the belief that Satan could grant men the power to change shape took the accusations seriously. The most infamous of these trials involved Peter Stump, a German farmer executed in 1589, known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. Stump was accused of striking a deal with the devil, using a magic belt to transform into a wolf. according to confessions likely extracted under brutal torture. He admitted to killing livestock, women, and even his own son. His trial ended with horrific execution. He was broken on the wheel, decapitated, and burned, all as a warning to others. In France, cases like that of Gilles Garnier echoed the same fears. Garnier was accused of prowling the countryside as a wolf, devouring children during harsh winters. His neighbors testified against him, and he too was burned at the stake in 1573. Such cases reveal how the werewolf was not just a myth, but a deadly accusation, one that could destroy lives through mass paranoia. What drove these hunts was not only fear of the supernatural, but also social tension. Famines, plagues, and political unrest created a need for scapegoats. The werewolf, like the witch, embodied society's darkest fears of hunger, of outsiders, of uncontrolled violence lurking in human nature. Court records from the era show chilling detail, men and women describing their supposed transformations, hunts, and meals of human flesh. Some may have been mentally ill, others coerced, and some victims of mass hysteria. Regardless, the image of the werewolf as a bloodthirsty monster was cemented during these centuries of persecution. The werewolf trials demonstrate a turning point. No longer a figure of ambiguous folklore or tragic poetry, the beast became a symbol of evil, bound to witchcraft and diabolism. This brutal legacy would haunt European memory for centuries, lay the groundwork for the fearsome werewolf that taunted Silo Villa. Moan, no longer a figure of werewolf that stalks through modern horror. For centuries, the werewolf was seen as a cursed being, a monster lurking in the shadows of Europe's forests. But as the Enlightenment dawned and science began to question the old superstitions, scholars sought rational explanations for the terrifying stories. Could the legends of men transforming into wolves be rooted not in the supernatural, but in misunderstood illnesses and psychological conditions? One of the earliest medical theories connected the werewolf myth to lycanthropy, a rare psychiatric disorder in which a person truly believes they can transform into an animal. Historical case reports describe individuals howling at the moon, crawling on all fours, or attacking livestock as though they were wolves. In the 19th and 20th centuries, psychiatrists began classifying these behaviors under clinical lycanthropy delusion rather than an actual transformation. Though extremely rare, the disorder continues to be documented in medical literature. Even today, another possible link lies in rabies, a viral infection spread by animal bites. Before modern medicine, rabies was a mysterious and terrifying disease. Its symptoms: uncontrollable aggression, foaming at the mouth, sensitivity to light and water, resembled the frenzied behavior attributed to werewolves. An infected person could appear animalistic, their sudden violence convincing frightened villagers that a human had become a beast. There is also speculation that genetic conditions may have fueled the myth. For example, hypertrichosis, sometimes called werewolf syndrome, causes excessive hair growth over the body and face. In medieval villages, individuals with this rare condition might have been shunned or feared, their unusual appearance reinforcing the image of a human-animal hybrid. Beyond biology, some historians argue that werewolf legends reflect the projection of human violence. During times of famine and war, reports of cannibalism and murder sometimes emerged. To explain such horrific acts, communities attributed them to a monstrous transformation, because it was easier to believe a wolf had killed than to face the truth that humans were capable of such brutality. Thus, the werewolf shifts from myth to metaphor, embodying the dark sides of human psychology and disease. What was once blamed on curses or the devil may have been symptoms of illnesses, disorders, or simply the cruelty of desperate times. Yet, even with these scientific explanations, the fascination remains, because perhaps the most haunting question persists. If the werewolf is merely an invention of the human mind, what does it reveal about Usa, our fear, our instincts, and the beast that might still lurk within. Among all the scientific explanations offered for the werewolf legend, perhaps the most fascinating is clinical lycanthropy, rare psychiatric condition in which a person truly believes they have transformed into an animal. Most commonly, a wolf. Unlike ordinary hallucinations, this disorder goes deeper. Patients often describe vivid sensations of their body changing, feeling fur sprouting from their skin, or claws replacing their fingernails. Historical records reveal how such cases may have been mistaken for literal transformations. In the 16th and 17th centuries, European court documents describe trials of individuals who insisted they were wolves. Some confessed, under no sign of torture, that they prowled at night and killed livestock in animal form. Today, psychiatrists recognize these testimonies as consistent with delusional disorders rather than evidence of real metamorphosis. Modern case studies add even more depth to the phenomenon. In a 1980s medical journal, doctors described a patient who was utterly convinced he had become a wolf, refusing to eat normal food and demanding raw meat. In another case, a woman believed she alternated between human and wolf identities, her voice changing in pitch and tone when she claimed to be the animal. Brain scans of such patients suggest abnormalities in areas linked to body perception regions of the brain, responsible for processing our sense of form and self-image. Lycanthropy is often associated with other psychiatric conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or severe depression. It may be triggered by stress, trauma, or neurological disorders that disturb how a person perceives themselves. To the outside observer, these behaviors, howling, crawling, even attacking others, would have seemed like undeniable proof of a transformation. For villagers of the Middle Ages who had no knowledge of psychology, such actions were terrifying evidence of the supernatural. The rarity of clinical lycanthropy makes it all the more intriguing. Fewer than 100 documented cases exist worldwide, and each differ slightly in presentation. While most involve wolves, others describe transformations into tigers, dogs, or even snakes. Yet, the wolf remains the most common and, perhaps the most culturally resonant animal. Through the lens of science, lycanthropy transforms from a curse into a psychiatric mystery. It reveals the fragile boundary between the mind's perception and physical reality, showing how powerful belief can reshape human behavior. What once condemned a person as a monster is now understood as a cry for medical help. Still, the question lingers. Did ancient villagers truly encounter werewolves? Or were they witnessing the tragic symptoms of an illness no one yet understood? If there is one disease that might have fueled the werewolf legend more than any other, it is rabies. For centuries, this viral infection transmitted through the bite of an animal, often a dog or wolf, spread terror across Europe. In the days before vaccines or modern medicine, a bite almost always meant a slow, horrifying death. The symptoms of rabies eerily resemble traits often associated with werewolves. Victims would suffer from extreme agitation, uncontrollable aggression, and violent fits of rage. They sometimes bit others, not out of choice, but because their nervous system was under attack. Hydrophobia and inability to drink water due to spasms in the throat left them foaming at the mouth. Two terrified villagers, the sight of someone stumbling through the night, snarling and spitting, looked less like sickness and more like a cursed transformation historically. Outbreaks of rabies coincided with bursts of werewolf hysteria. In 16th century France, a wave of rabid wolf attacks swept through rural communities. Shortly after, the infamous werewolf trials began, in which dozens were accused of turning into beasts and devouring children. In hindsight, it is possible that some accused werewolves were in fact rabies victims, or survivors of wolf bites whose violent behavior was misinterpreted as evidence of shapeshifting. Medical texts from the Middle Ages also described wolf madness, terms strikingly similar to both rabies and lycanthropy. In an age without germ theory, the line between illness and curse was thin. A rabies victim's terrifying transformation could not be explained by natural science. So people turned to folklore for answers. Even today, rabies retains its mythic aura. The incubation period, weeks or even months of apparent normalcy after. A bite mirrors the chilling delay of a curse waiting to reveal itself. And once symptoms appear, death is almost certain, evoking the inevitability of a supernatural fate. Scientists now understand rabies as a viral attack on the nervous system spread through saliva. But for our ancestors, every wolf bite was a potential doorway to horror. The legend of the werewolf may therefore have roots not only in imagination, but in the very real terror of a disease that blurred the boundary between human and beast. In a world without vaccines, medicine, or scientific knowledge, what could seem more like dark magic than a bite that slowly turns a loved one into something wild, violent, and unrecognizable? When we trace the legend of the werewolf through history, what emerges is not just a story of monsters, but a reflection of human fear. Fear of the wilderness, fear of the wolf, fear of disease, and even fear of our own darker instincts. The werewolf is more than a creature of myth, is a mirror that humanity has held up to itself for centuries. From medieval Europe's trials to tribal myths across the world, the werewolf has taken countless shapes: a cursed sinner, a warrior, blessed by gods, or a victim of dark sorcery. Yet beneath all these variations lies a common theme: the transformation of man into beast. Two people living in times when the line between civilization and wilderness was thin. That transformation was both terrifying and plausible. Modern science has peeled back some of the mystery. Conditions like lycanthropy delusion, where individuals genuinely believe they are turning into animals, demonstrate the power of the human mind to blur reality. Diseases like rabies, with their horrifying symptoms of aggression and madness, may have provided a very real foundation for stories of distinct men howling at the moon and attacking their neighbors. In this sense, folklore and medicine are not opposites, but different lenses through which humans have tried to explain the unexplainable. Psychology also teaches us that myths endure because they touch something primal. The werewolf represents the beast within the violent urges, the instinct for survival, the animal side of humanity that polite society tries to bury. Every full moon, every howl in the dark, every unexplained act of violence was once a reminder that the boundary between human and beast might be thinner than we would like to believe. And so the werewolf survives. Not because we still believe in curses, but because it symbolizes questions we still wrestle with today. Are we truly in control of ourselves? What happens when instinct overtakes reason? Where does humanity end and animal begin? In the end, the werewolf is both legend and lesson. A creature born from fear, sustained by imagination, and explained at least in part by science. Whether we see it as a monster of the night or as a metaphor for the struggles within, one truth remains: the werewolf will never fully die. It will continue to prowl through our myths, our nightmares, and our understanding of what it means to be human.